What we're reading for our second reading today is the prologue to John, the Gospel of John. So it's John 1, verses 1 through 18. It's richly layered and introduces the major themes of the Gospel. So let us listen carefully to this poetic but yet theologically dense instruction by John. And I will indicate to you some breaks in the parts that I think help in the interpretation or listening to this. So we begin the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. Then we have a break. We're going to talk about John the Baptist. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. And then our third segment of the prologue. Christ was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of will of the flesh or the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me because he was before me.' From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is only the Son, himself God, who is close to the Father's heart, who is made known." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. To me, and I hope to you, words matter. Yet in our culture, in our time, words are sometimes cheapened, abused, or at least not weighed carefully. Sometimes they are seized upon as evidence of ideologies and wrongnesses. People are categorized by the words they use, even if they did not intend. Words matter. Even when hurtful and punishing words can be spread with perceived impunity, just laid out there in cyberspace, words still matter. This is also true when the prologue to John, with the prologue to the Gospel of John, what we just read, was written at a time and words mattered. The prologue of John's Gospel intentionally breaks off and breaks our self-imposed mold of the Christ story, the gospel message. Generally, we attempt too small, too limited a reading of the gospel by directing our attention toward a space-time reality we think we understand, what we feel we can experience. In contrast to John, the Gospels of Mark and Luke try to gently bring us up to speed by first introducing John the Baptist as they start their gospel messages. They help us stay grounded in the Christmas season and Christ's story we know so well and are so very comfortable with. John is different. on this second Sunday of Christmas season with those opening words, "In the beginning." John purges us into a deep time of prehistoric Genesis, the creative narrative, literally starting it all. Right from Genesis 1, like Genesis 1, he starts in the beginning. John wants us to give ourselves over to a reshaped space-time reality, reshape of all history, of all that exists. Wants us to enter the cosmic realm of God's dwelling, a realm no longer confined by time scales or geographies as we want to define them, a realm before there was a world or a universe, a time before chronology, a history before history. This is the beginning of the good news, cosmic in scope, timeless in scale, in the beginning. If you envision the season of Christmas as simply a celebration of God come near, then you may well miss how John is preparing us for this infleshing of the divine in our midst, by directing our gaze not at a simple manger in a shed, or a lovely holy family, or a Christ child, but towards the cosmos, the whole thing. The cosmos saturated with light and life, coming to be, coming into time, into space, and ultimately creating our lives on this speck of creation called Earth. John starts with the real in the beginning. John tells us, in the beginning was the Word. Word with a capital W. Well, word with a lowercase w connotes to us language and communication. To John, word with a capital W holds those, includes language and communication, but is encompassing within anything even more substantial, everything in a larger meaning. We might understand John's use of the Greek term logos more clearly if we try to translate it something like the logic of God or the rationale of God. Perhaps these first verses suggest something like the speech of God bringing the divine logic or wisdom to bear on the cosmos. Or, in the beginning was the logic, the wisdom of God. The use of the word with a capital W or wisdom is not a newly created term by John. The use of the term wisdom occurs elsewhere in the what we call the Old Testament in Proverbs, in ways that also parallel and support the word in the Gospel of John. In Proverbs 8:22, wisdom speaks about her part in creation, saying, "The Lord created me in the beginning of his work, the first of his acts a long time ago." I hope you can see the parallel then in John, where the Word was in the beginning with God. Similarly, in Proverbs 3:19, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth, by understanding he established the heavens. John says that the word, capital W, all things came into being through him. Finally, in Proverbs 8:27-30, portrays wisdom working with God in the creation of the heavens and the deep and the skies of the sea, marking out the foundations of the earth. From John we have, without him, meaning the Word, not one thing came into being. While the term wisdom is not expressly used in John's text, readers and hearers of that day of the Jewish background, being familiar with the wisdom literature, certainly would have heard the echoes and made that association. With a slight change in terms, then, our verse 3 reads, "All things came into being through the Word. And without the Word, nothing, not one thing, came into being. What has come into being in the Word was life. And the life was the light of all people. It shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it. Now, theology scholars, debate when the incarnation, the manifestation of God, is first portrayed in John's prologue here. The most obvious answer would be verse 14, where it says, "And the Word became flesh and lived among us." But again, our original readers may well have gone back to earlier in the prologue, to the light shines in the darkness, and make incarnation, God with us, really a two-step process. We can consider what would happen if we accepted both phases seriously. First, the inbreaking of God's incarnate presence upon the cosmos, not in human flesh, but in the cosmic order of creation. Genesis evokes this. It says, "The God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light," from Genesis 1. Much later, John says it this way, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overtake it." The cosmos basks in the light of God before there are humans to perceive it. But then in the second step, the incarnation that we celebrate in Christmas season is expressed as, "And the Word became flesh and lived among us." John wants us to start with a God, the creator of all, and God in all. Only later does the Word become flesh and lived among us appear. As many commentators have remarked, the Greek term lived means more literally pitched his tent. Just as God traveled with the people of Israel in the wilderness by means of the tent of meeting in their midst, John announces that God has chosen to tabernacle among us in an even more radical way by the Word embodied in human flesh. In Jesus, God decided to come closer, to deliver the Word in person, the person of God's Son. The Word made flesh brings us a message that it would be hard for us to otherwise understand. That message is, a loving God has not left us in fear and confusion. We hear, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, in order that we might know beyond a doubt that God's love and compassion for us will have the final word, not fear and confusion. This is the reason the Word took on our flesh. The Word came to us in the form of a frail and vulnerable infant to dwell among us and show us firsthand the depth of God's love for us. Martin Luther expressed this truth in his Christmas sermons. Luther says that reflection on the divinity and majesty of God may very well terrify and crush us. That is why Christ took on our humanity, that he should not terrify us, but rather that with love and favor he should console us. For what could be less intimidating and more comforting than a baby? Luther writes further, "See how God invites you in many ways. He places before you a babe with whom you may take refuge. You cannot fear him, for nothing is more appealing to a person than a babe. Are you afraid? Then come to him, lying in the lap of the fairest and sweetest maid. You will see how great is the divine goodness, which seeks above all else that you should not despair. Trust him, trust him. Here is the child in whom is salvation." Then Luther continues, "To me there is no greater consolation given to humankind than this, that Christ became human, a child, a babe, playing in the lap of his most gracious mother. Who is there whom this sight would not comfort? Now is overcome the power of sin, death, hell, conscience, and guilt, if you come to see the gurgling babe and believe that he is come, not to judge you, but to save. End of quote.